Hashem says He wants us to train the animal within us to slowly but surely start being sensitive, intuitive, and sensitive to God and godliness. The Fedish Mishnah, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha," with all your heart. Here he uses a double expression with Yetzer Hara as well. And the brilliant term of Yetzer Hara, in the way the Alter Rebbe defines it, obviously there's the dimension of Ra, which is completely evil, but what each one of us possess is as well the animal soul. Meaning the animal soul, we can understand how we could, just like an animal, you could train it to be more domestic and less animalistic and less harsh and less. Similarly, we can train our animal. The animal with us is not particularly bad; it's animalistic. It likes to do whatever contributes to the body's pleasures, delights, and delicacy. In other words, a delicacy and delight for the body, that's what it does. And we have to train the animal within us to be less animal and get more sensitive to the divine. So the Alter Rebbe starts with the animal soul itself, and then the garments of the animal, the thought, speech, and action of this animal. In other words, to transform it from relative. How can you? Because it comes from the middle klipa. It comes from the neutral klipa, which is klipas nega, which, because there's a little bit of light in nega, a little bit of light, we have the ability to transform it. So this is really recapping this in brief. Welcome also those who missed to just find it on, again, tanyaonline.com to see last week's class. And but we're going to just conclude over here, or before we go on in the text, we're going to just mention, which the Alter Rebbe mentions over here, it gives a few examples. Someone eats fat meat and drinks spicy wine, and for the purpose to broaden his mind for Hashem, for Hashem's Torah. So on the surface, it's a very physical action. Eating fat meat, a good steak, it's something which has on its own, it doesn't have any, you don't see any godly purpose or energy over here. But if you're eating it laharchiv daiti l'Hashem, to broaden your mind for Hashem, or for Hashem's Torah, then the eating itself and the drinking this good spicy wine becomes like you're sacrificing an oila, a korban. And we spoke last week, the oila, even the korban, which is the greatest korban of all, which goes all on the mizbeach. That is the korban oila. And for that matter, the korban oila was also meat, but it was sacrificed to Hashem. And when you make a bracha and have in mind that with that it's going to contribute to your understanding the Torah you're going to learn subsequently, the Torah, the eating itself, the meal itself, becomes like a korban to Hashem. And it brings a Gemara. Rava said, "Chamer v'reicha pikchin." Good wine, v'reicha, good fragrance, as well good fragrance. It crystallizes the mind. And we brought down the story of the Rameir. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Rav Nachman. I have to look in again. That one day we're dealing with a certain subject, and the next day he brought so much clarity to that same subject. They asked him, what happened? Well, you were dealing with the same subject yesterday. They said, you said last night I ate fat meat. So he said, because of that, it crystallized his mind, it sharpened his mind, and it brought clarity to the subject they were dealing with in the Beis HaMedrash. So you see over here that even it's a very physical piece of meat, and cooked well, you're eating it, we're eating it normally. But because there's a godly purpose, so then the piece of meat, it leaves its state of neutrality and it becomes Kaddish. Like we used the example, the analogy of 2 weeks before about the conveyor belt. It becomes a double Kaddish. It goes completely on the conveyor belt, which receives its energy directly from Kedusha. The Rebbe gives another example. This is for a purpose, to understand the piece of Gemara better. Then there's certain times during the year that eating the meat itself is a mitzvah, like Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's not just for a purpose, later I'm going to understand the piece of Gemara better. It's a mitzvah, l'kaim. It says, Einik Shabbos, the right pleasure from the basar and dogim, to eat the basar and dogim. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, it becomes a mitzvah of Shabbos and Yom Tov. So then again, it's not only for a purpose. Eating itself, obviously, we don't have to. It doesn't mean that a person Shabbos and Yom Tov become completely lose it. In other words, become completely animalistic. I didn't mention a story last week, a famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, and he said he wanted to see he showed his Talmidim. He says, "I'm going to show you an ox in a shtreimel." An ox with a shtreimel. Shtreimel is that classic, the Polish hat, which was Polish covering on the head. It was many years. This was the Shabbos garment. Even till today, it's a Shabbos garment. They wear the special shtreimel. It was the oxen shtreimel, and he was sitting on Yid, which was sitting and eating his meat, which he was eating on Shabbos. So then he was so involved. So the Baal Shem Tov brought the Maimon is saying, which says, it's saying, to the place where the thought is, the thought of a person, that's where he is. Or the desire of a person, it's saying the place where he's completely motivated to be, that's where he really is. So he was so involved in biting and taking the juice and the marrow out of this out of the piece of meat that he was eating. He was like eating it so, he was so involved in his eating. So that's where he was. That's where he was. That's who he was. And he had to wear shtreimel. So he was eating meat of an ox. So it was like the ox and shtreimel. No, we're not chas v'shalom saying anything negative over here. It's just the idea. It doesn't mean because it's Shabbos, therefore I could completely lose it. That doesn't have to be negated. Shabbos is Shabbos, and Yontiv is Yontiv. Karasala Shabbos Einig. Likdeish Hashem Mechubad. It's about Kedushas Shabbos and so on. But in the same token, there's a mitzvah. The Shabbos, the Suda, the meal of Shabbos should be more lavish. And there's a mitzvah to eat basar, a mitzvah to eat dagim. So then it's not for something else. The mitzvah itself is to enjoy a piece of meat, a good piece of meat on Shabbos. The mitzvah itself is to enjoy a good piece of fish, as an example, or good wine. So then, the eating and drinking itself, that itself is like an elu korban. It's like a sacrifice. So in the middle of the week when there's no mitzvah to eat meat or drink, the person eats it for a purpose to sharpen his mind in order to learn Torah. So it's ultimately for something else. And then, even then, retroactively, when he starts, it goes back to the time that he eats that piece of meat, it becomes like a sacrifice to Hashem. Shabbos and Yontiv, it's even more, it's different, because Shabbos and Yontiv, it's a mitzvah itself to eat basar. Yeah. That was one example that Alter Rebbe gave. One more example, for that matter, I'm noticing over here that in today's text, which we printed, we don't have yet, this piece we didn't do. So we'll say this orally, because Alter Rebbe brings another example. We stopped over here, in which the Ke'elu K'Karban, regarding the eating and the consuming the meat and drinking the wine, etc. But Alter Rebbe brings another example, which is again a little piece just prior to the text which we printed for today's class. So Alter Rebbe says another example of saying milsa de b'dichose. He says something which is a little maybe a joke. And what does he say the joke for? And to open one's mind and to bring joy to the heart, ultimately for Hashem, for His Torah and for His service, the person has to be serve Hashem with joy. It's not enough he serves Hashem, right? It's not enough he serves Hashem. Ivdu es Hashem besimcha. You have to serve Hashem with joy. To the extent, famous Arizal said that it's very crucial. It's not just like another component in our Avodas Hashem. It's very crucial that we don't serve Hashem without simcha. That every service of ours to Hashem may be learning Torah, davening, and tshuva even. Usually comes with a broken heart, and so on. Even that itself has to be a certain level of simcha, of joy, that the person is returning to Hashem, as an example of tshuva, doing tzedakah, gemilas chasadim. So the Marizal has a beautiful pirush. The Alter Rebbe is going to bring it later in chapter Chavav, this 26th chapter. Marizal said that Hashem is upset that not only that we didn't serve Him, we served Him, we didn't serve Him with joy. So it's a very crucial that Yid serves Hashem constantly in every level of service, the type of service which is part of Avodas Hashem, the package of Avodas Hashem has to be b'simcha, b'joy. So what if a person makes a joke? He sits down with a bunch of people and they're starting to learn. Everybody has their kind of the stress, their problems, and you want to jump into a piece of Gemara right away. Not always it works. So the teacher would make a joke, and Alter Rebbe brings not only a theoretical example, but Sha'asar Rava l'Talmidav. Rava conduct himself in that manner when he sat with his Talmidim, and before he started his shir. There was so many Talmidim in front of him, and before he started shir, Amar lifnei milsa de b'dichas etchila, he made a joke before. Ubat Charaban, everybody started laughing, and then he went in. Interestingly, the Gemara says the change of Rava was from one extreme to the other. It was a moment of laughter and looseness And a moment later, it says that he went into a very serious tone, because ultimately you're dealing with Teiras Hashem, not just an academic study. Teira is godliness himself, especially as in Tanya, the essence of God is in Teira, and they saw it right away in the way Rava, the way the Gemara describes. The way Rava started learning was without all that seriousness, which is befitted to the study of Teira. But prior to that, he made a joke, a kind of a loose saying, Ubat Cherabana. Hi, how are you? Ubat Cherabana. And they smiled. And they smiled. So we see that someone so great like Rav even did that as well. A just a joke, for example, on its own, there's no meaning to it. There's no sort of special holiness to it. There's no sanctity in it. Not at all. For that matter, if it's not used for the purpose of God, godly purpose, it also could bring a person's too loose in his daily conduct, or his overall conduct, his overall behavior. It could lead to the worst things. If you learn simple Pirkei Avos, schek, kalus reish, looseness brings to the worst. But in this case, on its own, he didn't chas v'shalom say something which is also prohibited, because that's clearly shalosh kibbutz atmeis, lashon hara, rechilus. You can't sit down before a shir to get people to get their attention, because again, like we say, they're all having a stressful day, a stressful week. You want to get their attention to understand the Blat Gemara, a good piece, a juicy piece of lashon hara. That's asur, because the lashon hara is intrinsically prohibited. However, this joke, saying it like very joke, there's probably another word to it. There's something, this loose type of saying. If there's nothing prohibited in it, so it's klipas neged, it's a neutral klipa. But with a neutral klipa, you can go regress, you can progress. In this case, it was a great progression, because this is the way that it got everybody's attention. To start learning Torah with Yira and with Eima, but rest of the like the Gemara says, how a person is supposed to learn Torah, awe and fear the day he received the Torah. So that it's something which is neutral, but with that, he got everybody to learn Torah. So when was the Shaychus to Kedusha? When did that connection to Kedusha commence? Is not when he started learning, but even when he said that Nilsa the B'dichasa, because that got him into learning. So that itself becomes Kedusha. At that moment, it flips to the other. Again, we use the analogy of the conveyor belt, which receives completely from Kedusha. So that's when you're progressing. It's neutral, you're going front. And now we're starting in the text, mishu bezel basar. He's taking the same piece of meat, and now he can go backwards with it as well. Like we said, when you say something neutral, this is what the that vulnerability, if you will, of that neutral state of klipas nega, that if you're on top of it, if you're on alert, you can go ahead with it. But if you're not on alert with it, you can go backwards as well. And again, with choice. Nothing happens on its own. It's all with our freedom of choice, but the Alter Rebbe is showing us the ability with the same piece of meat and the same cup of wine, you can go backwards as well. And when you say backwards, I mean, you think about 3 levels. There's nothing in between. When you say backwards, you're following back into shalosh klipas atmeis, to the lowest level of impurity. It's not you just going back. Try to use the analogy of the automobile. When you're going back, and there's no such a thing, I'm just going to, from neutral, I'm just going to do something to between back and neutral. No. If you put it on reverse, you're really going back. It would be dangerous. Obviously, in a way that it's... So there's only 3 levels. Neutral, which can go back, and you can go frontwards. That's it. There's nothing else. So when you say that through this neutral state of the thought, speech, and action of the animal soul, and in this case of eating, consuming the wine, and drinking consuming the meat and drinking the wine, when you say you go one step back, God forbid, you're falling into that level of shalosh kibbutz atmeis, which is really similar to eating a non-kosher piece of meat. That's how careful in a sense we have to be. Even something which is 100% kosher, if we just do it without any godly purposes, to a certain extent, it's much like eating a non-kosher piece of meat. Because once you go backwards and you have 1, 2, only 3 levels from neutral to go back, so you really shows from that maze. As Alter Rebbe continues, which is overly involved and engaging and overly indulgent in eating wine and the seva yayin. Again, there's a lashon. If you see the with in an unrefined manner, and for that any purpose, just lemalas taivas gufei, to fulfill the lust, the covet, lust, desire, passion of the body, v'nafshe bahamis, and the animal soul. That's all he's eating. No purpose at all. For that matter, if you notice, you see the lashon zelud v'seve, which is the classic child, of the rebellious child, which Torah deals with. Because recently we had in the parsha that is a child which is Torah classified in the zelud v'seve. He eats kosher meat and drinks kosher wine, but he does it in such an unrefined manner. Rachmana litzlan, can be one of the greatest sins which could lead to the death penalty. Says the Gemara says it never happened because there's so many conditions and criteria in order that particular case should happen. It's a very short time in the child's life, and etc. It's from bar mitzvah, 3 months. The Gemara says it never happened. It's just dreish v'kabel schar. There's another part of Torah which Hashem says learn it and you'll receive a reward just to learn this, and becomes a mitzvah. In the Torah is one of the 613 mitzvahs, and it becomes again part of Torah that you'll learn it, you'll receive the reward because you're learning Torah. It really never happened, but the idea of it, unfortunately, this can happen, and unfortunately, in over the years, in the history of Am Yisrael and Rahman in every generation, there's the child which goes astray. In what way? That he's not even before he gets to do anything which is completely directly prohibited, he does the permitted, but in a very ungodly manner, an immoral manner. So he has a little bit like the sparks of the zelud v'seve. He doesn't fit the criteria of the zelud v'seve the way it's classified in the Torah. Like the Gemara says, it probably never happened. But it's the concept. Conceptually, it exists. And the Alter Rebbe says, eating kosher meat, but for all the sole purpose, l'madas taivas gufei v'nafshe is just to fulfill the temptation of the body and the animal soul. And that you say hamayim. This is the water foundation. If you remember, just like in everything in the world has the eish ruach mayim for the fire, the water, the air, and the afar and the earth. And so too, the Alter Rebbe says, in character of man, associated with the animal soul, the Alter Rebbe elaborated on this in the first Perek of Tanya. Each one holds within itself different negative animalistic character traits which are associated with the animal soul. Fire with anger, haughtiness, if you remember in the first page. Mayim, water, the Alter Rebbe says, just like water, matzmichim kol minei tainug, produce and sprout all different types of pleasures, like vegetables and fruits and so on. Water is an important component. They should grow, and they should sprout, and they should come out nicely. So too, the water dimension within the animal soul produces this character to look for anything and engage with anything which contributes to my pleasure. There's no godly purpose at all, just to fulfill my animalistic pleasure. Now, everybody say this right again for the 4 evil foundations, which exists within the from there, from this, you say the foundation of water, there which comes the character of passion, of temptation to worldly matters, again, things which are just going to contribute to my comfort and joy and pleasure. So there's no godly purpose, so you're going in reverse now. The energy of that meat and the wine within the person, and it's absorbed, and it is included. Well, soon Alter Rebbe is going to explain what is that lefisha. Lefisha means in a time for a timely period. We're going to soon find out what is lefisha. But what is Alter Rebbe basically trying to say? Mainly of a berak gomer. It falls completely in the total, in the level of total evil. Shabashol klipos atmeis, which is in the 3 impure klipos. Like we said, once you're going reverse, there's nothing in between the neutral klipa, klipas negashos, klipas etzmeis. So if there's no godly purpose, it falls again and used. It's important. I think it's an analogy which explains us, or it contributes a lot to the message of the Alter Rebbe over here, that it completely goes on the other conveyor belt. What means the other conveyor belt? Where is that piece of meat right now receiving its energy from? If I didn't eat it with a godly purpose, from shalosh klipas atmeis. That's where it's receiving its energy from, just like a non-kosher piece of meat. And therefore, because where is it now? I consumed it, so it's within my body. So not only that piece of meat is receiving its energy from Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, but because it's within my body, v'gufay, my body now nasa lahen levush, became a garment to Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, umerkov, and a chariot, which means what is riding on my body? The energy of complete impurity. But Levisha, again, the Alter Rebbe says, just for a certain amount of time. So we see the Alter Rebbe writes in this 2 lines, and a line and a half, Alter Rebbe writes again Levisha, for a certain amount of time. Why does Alter Rebbe add the first certain amount of time? So first of all, the Alter Rebbe says, the time is till the person will turn back to Hashem's service, Hashem's Torah. So what does it take over here? To put it back, throw back on the other conveyor belt, and not only the other conveyor belt of Klipas Nega, that neutral Klipa, but bring it all the way to the other extreme of Kedusha, do tshuva. Go back to service of Hashem. Even if you ate it for a non-godly purpose, but because you have a certain amount of energy now, and you could take that energy and open a Gemara and understand a piece of Gemara better than if you hadn't eaten it in the first place. So right now you're yanking it out of the state, not of Klipas Nega, but then you don't have to really yank out of Klipas Nega, because there's a little bit Nega, there's a little bit light in it. I use the word yank because the Alter Rebbe says you brought it down because when you ate it, you didn't have a godly purpose, it wasn't for a godly sake. So you threw it over to the other side. Lefisha, it's only for part-time, because I can make the decision right now. I'm going to open the Gemara and I'm going to utilize the energy of that food. So in the beginning, when I didn't need it for godly purpose, it fell back. But I have the ability to yank it out, and again, yank because it's all the way in Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, to go back and to elevate it to Hashem's service and Hashem's Torah. If I'm going to do a good deed to somebody else, and to serve God, bin adam lamokim, between man and his creator, between man and his fellow's friend, which is also under the umbrella of Hashem's service of Hashem. Or the Torah say, I'm going to learn a piece of Gemara, anything. So I know, and with that, I'm able to elevate it. So now the question is, or the way we're going to see the words right after this, we're going to understand how we just said that something which is associated with Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, as an example we gave 2 weeks ago, something which is non-kosher piece of meat. Once it's Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, it is, in other words, it comes from this level of total impurity, and someone consumes it, we say not only that itself is connected to the tumah, it brings the person who consumed it all the way down to the level of tumah. So what if someone's going to say the same thing? Okay, it was something wrong. I have within myself something associated with Shalosh Klipos Atmeis. Then I'm going to grab a Gemara. I'm going to sit in the Gemara, or daven better, or do a favor to another yid. And apparently I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to also yank it out of Shalosh Klipos Atmeis. Could you yank the energy out of Shalosh Klipos Atmeis? Could you pull something which is connected to Shalosh Klipos Atmeis back to the neutral klipa, or even to the other side, to Kedusha? According to what we say over here, you can. So apparently, why shouldn't I be able to say the same thing with a non-kosher piece of meat? The answer, and the Alter Rebbe is going to say it inside, but before, let's try to understand it orally. The problem is that the non-kosher piece of meat, it's not circumstantial that it made its way to Shalosh Klipos Atmeis. It's intrinsically Shalosh Klipos Atmeis. As opposed to something which is kosher and it dropped to Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, it's, I say the word circumstantial, it's only because I didn't eat it with a godly purpose. So it's not so anchored down into that world of Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, therefore I have the ability to yank it out. As opposed to a non-kosher piece of meat, it's so connected, it's so anchored in Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, I cannot pull it out. Well, there's a whole phenomenon of tshuva Alter Rebbe is going to introduce over here in the next part of this period. But over here, Alter Rebbe says it's only lefi, and let's see how we see this notion, this idea in the following words: Rishba hayabasar heter. V'yayin kosher, because the meat itself was mutter, it was permissible. V'yayin kosher, and it was kosher wine. L'kachi chelim lachzer v'lalas imei b'shuva l'avodas Hashem. That's why he has the ability to ascend together with a person. Not only the person goes to the Gemara and serves Hashem, but the meat itself, or the wine itself, has the ability to ascend as he turns to Hashem, together with the person as he turns to avodas Hashem, to the service of God. And the Alter Rebbe says something very beautiful. Shezel loshen heter or mutter, permissible. Permissible literally means, mutter means it's not tied. You know, they said Hashem matir asurim. We say every day in that Baruch Atah Hashem matir asurim. You untie those who are tied. So they said the way the joke goes is Hashem matir asurim. He's a mashgiach. He's a local mashgiach, right? He gives a head to something which is aser. If you think about it, Matir Asurim is another way of saying he's a Mashgiach. In other words, he checks things out, and he's Matir Asurim, which is obviously not the pshat of the bracha. Bracha means something people who are tied. Literally means we say in the morning, because at night the person goes to sleep. He doesn't maneuver, and he could. Some people wake up and they can't move, and we have the ability to move and maneuver. So we say, we thank Hashem. Hashem, you untied us, which we are tied. In the overall, we say Hashem has the ability to be Matir Asurim. Someone is incarcerated. Hashem can take him out of his imprisonment and his incarceration. That's the bracha Matir Asurim. So the Rebbe says, if you think about mutter and asur, when you say something is mutter and asur, why do you use the word mutter and asur? You should say it's kosher or non-kosher, which we use that term as well. But why? What's something? It's mutter, it's asur. You have a heter for this product, or you don't have a heter for this product. What's the expression of heter? But the Rebbe says, now that we understand it, we understand that its connection, is circumstantial, or it's based on the freedom of choice of man. In other words, my choice that I brought it to such a degree, to such a state on its own, it's not. That's the lashon heter. Heter means it's not anchored in shalosh klipos hatmeis. When you say something is asur, asur means like it's incarcerated in shalosh klipos hatmeis. You cannot go to a jail and just pop the door open and take somebody out. Or someone from within certainly cannot pop the door open and come out. From your backyard, you could flip a little gate and take yourself out. You could take someone else out as well. Because it's mutter. Mutter means it's opened. Mutter literally means it's opened. Asur means it's imprisoned. Mutter means it's open. It's unlocked. Now we can understand why a kosher piece of meat is not only called kosher, but it's called mutter, because that's its virtue that even a person did not eat with a godly purpose, and he did throw it backwards. He regressed. He threw it back into the world of shalosh klipos hatmeis. But because it's mutter, it's not locked. You have the ability to open up and go back. In other words, not only you go back to service of Hashem, you pull that piece of meat because it was kosher and it was mutter. It was unlocked. Therefore, you have the ability to bring it back to Klipas Nega, and mainly even to the level of Kedusha. It's not tied, it's not locked in, it's not imprisoned in the hand of the Chitzenim, in other words, the external evil, impure forces, which is again in this context, shalosh klipos hatmeis, that it should not be able to go back into a center to Hashem. It can, it's mutter. You can pull it out. As opposed to something which is Torah says it's asur. It's not based on my choice. Torah says it's asur, so it's intrinsically asur. It's essentially connected and anchored into the world of impurity. So I cannot say, okay, I ate that non-kosher piece of meat. Now let me take a gemara and sit gemara. You're not gonna elevate it. More so, it's gonna pull you down together with the gemara you're learning, because it's asur. It's not. There's no opening over here. So everything seems to be good. So in a sense, the person is going to say, if that's the case, what's the difference? In the end, I could always jump back on. It's like I always yank out. If I didn't eat it with a godly purpose, okay, so it fell to shalosh klipos hatmeis. But because it was mutter, I pulled it out. I have always the chance to go ahead and pull it out because it's mutter. It's not asur. So what's the big deal of me eating something with a godly purpose? I'll get it out in the end. So first of all, it usually doesn't work like that. The famous the mission is Aveda Geresh Aveda. Once a person is indifferent to godly command, to put perspective and purpose to life, and if he doesn't do that, it not necessarily is always going to grab the Gemara. It's more likely he's going to take the newspaper after that. But let's say a person does have his willpower to go ahead and constantly come back easily and say, okay, I'm going to take the Gemara. I'm going to use the energy of this piece of food, this piece of meat that I ate, or any other food product, or any food or product that I ate, that even I didn't leave a godly purpose, I'm going to always be able to come back with it. Go back to service of God and not only bring myself up or bring myself to the level of the service of God, but also elevate this food product which I consumed also to the service of God. The Rebbe said there's one disadvantage. Because eventually, because even eventually you bring it up, and you're able to retroactively elevate that piece of meat or anything, but because in the beginning you did not eat it with a godly purpose, a stain remains in the body. It's like when you take a piece of paper, and take a pencil and write your name, and take an eraser, you can erase it completely. If you look carefully, you always see a little mark. And that mark stays in the body if a person doesn't eat something l'shem shamayim, for godly purpose, even though later he comes back, a complete comeback. And with that, and with the comeback that we said before, because it's mutter, he's able to elevate that piece of food. But because in the very beginning he didn't with a godly purpose, there's shima minisha beguf. And al kain tzar haguf lechibet hakever, famous chibet hakever, which is not Gehenim, it's not purgatory. He says when the person after 120, says certain malachim take his kever and they shake it up in order to get rid of this taint, this stain. What is the stain? It's not purgatory because it's not Gehenim yet, because it's no Isur. It's not he consumed anything which is prohibited. For this you don't have to go down to Gehenim. But because of this stain which remained, even something which was permissible, so therefore the person needs the Chibet HaKever. Let's explain let's explain later. And what is this? And what is it ultimately telling us? That we shouldn't always wait for the second chance. We sit down and eat, or anything a person needs in the overall, because he belongs to the he's an Eivid Hashem, he serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Doesn't mean every apple a person picks up does he have to you have to be a little bit normal also. I don't mean to say chas v'shalom you have to be very careful with the wording. A person does, the Chassidim HaRishonim, before they took a bite into an apple, they thought 100 times if this is something which is going to contribute to my Vedas Hashem, or just something to me giving into my temptation. But not everybody, we're not everybody to jump to this level immediately. In other words, we have to gradually introduce these concepts, these ideas that the Rebbe is explaining to us, and eventually we can reach this level that everything I consume, every engagement, the worldly matters with a complete godly purpose. Ideally, it's supposed to be so. Which this idea that Alter Rebbe is telling is a shima minit and menisha beguf, that a bit of a stain remains in the body, is encouraging to us that we shouldn't have to wait till in other words, to come in as a second time around, or after we just let loose, and then we're going to utilize the energy of that, because there's a disadvantage of that. You'll be able to elevate the food, but a little stain remains in the body. And if a little stain remains in the body, there's a problem. The person needs chibut hakerev, so l'chatchila do it right. Masha'enkin, as opposed to something in here that Alter Rebbe says, like we said before, this is something which is permissible. Masha'enkin machalas asureis, as opposed to things which are intrinsically prohibited, and that's a lashon asureis. They're imprisoned. Where are they imprisoned? They're imprisoned in the world of shalosh chivas atmeis. The Hashem says, do not eat them. Not only it's permitted in this question what kind of thoughts I'm going to have, or for what kind of purpose I'm going to consume them. Hashem says this is meat, or this is food which is prohibited to eat. There are asurais. Same thing, bias asurais in engaging. In other words, this is in the context of marriage. In other words, a concept of relationship, which Torah says that is prohibited to have a relationship with this and this person. Again, there's so many psukim which Torah deals with different prohibitions, which a person is not allowed. The person is not allowed to marry this person. The person is not allowed to marry in certain situations. A woman which is married is not allowed having a relationship with another person. This is called bias asuris. There's many psukim in Torah which Torah tells us with who a person is not allowed to have a relationship, not allowed getting married to. So this is something which is not dependent on the way dependent on the way I perform a certain act or engage in a certain worldly affair and matter. No, this is something which Torah says you're not allowed to eat that, and it's prohibited. These particular relationships are prohibited. So they're called asuris. Asuris in this context means that they're anchored and they're tied to shalosh klipas atmeis legamri, the three klipas atmeis, in other words, the level of total impurity. So asurim ukshurim. They are tied and they're anchored and they're incarcerated. Even if you use lashon asur b'dei achitzenim la'elam, forever, eternally, they are tied to the world of impurity. And they could never ascend from there, meaning it's not a matter how much I'm going to have a kavanah here or there, because it's intrinsically usher. They never ascend from there at kiyava yaimam, till their day will come, when Mashiach will come. And what does it say? Death will be swallowed forever. And death doesn't only mean physical death, it means spiritual death. Anything which is associated with Kedusha and mitzvah are called Chaim, is called life. Like the Pasuk says, Va'atim hadvekim b'Hashem Elokeichem Chaim kol chamayim. You cleave to God, you are alive, you are living, because Hashem is called Chai, it's true life. He does Torah mitzvahs, he connects himself to true and eternal life. Anything which is opposite than mitzvah, than Kedusha, than Tahara, the antithesis of it is ultimately death, may it be physical or spiritual death. And ultimately physical death is a consequent to spiritual death, like we saw by Adam HaRishon. He's supposed to live forever, but he fell spiritually. Consequently, he fell physically as well. So the Alter Rebbe says over here that the pasuk doesn't. It's not a country. It goes together. When you say Yivul Hamavis LaNetzach, when Mashiach will come, death will be swallowed forever. It doesn't mean only physical death. The whole notion of death, which means as death being the antithesis to Kedusha, that will be swallowed forever. As like the pasuk says, Hashem says, I will take away the spirit of impurity. And the same thing, it says, it goes together, it's synonymous with all the midrashim which Hashem is going to uproot any evil inclination. Hashem is going to shech the Yetzer Hara. These are definitely different statements, but they all synonymous one with each other, that Hashem himself is going to uproot all levels of impurity. But if you want to use the one word for levels of impurity, one sentence, this is Shalosh Klipsat Meis, that Hashem himself is going to eradicate. When is that going to be? When Mashiach comes. When Mashiach is going to come, that's why it says, Asit Chazir Lihi Tayr. Be able to consume the Chazir. How's that? Because the whole problem of the Chazir now, because it's connected to Shalosh Klipsat Meis. Hashem is going to Surah Chatum Ma'avim Minar. The thing is very brief, just to understand that we find these Medrashim, these sayings of the Gemara, they're all ultimately connected, extremely connected and integrated one with the other, interconnected one with the other. Because the problem of all this is that it's connected to Shalosh Klipsat Meis, the lowest level of impurity. But when Mashiach comes in, there's a pasuk that says, that Hashem says, I'm going to uproot and eradicate all levels of impurity. We can understand all these midrashim, all these sayings of the Gemara. Only then there is some security, or there's some hope to the problem of someone consuming machalas asuris or engaging bias asuris, because today they're asur, they're completely tied to Shalosh Klipsat Meis, and therefore we can't just say I'm going to grab a Gemara, learn Gemara with the energy of that, because it's intrinsically impure, and the Ein El Misham, they never ascend till their day will come when Hashem says it's Rechatum Ma'avim Min Haaretz. Then we'll stop over here, but Alter Rebbe is going to introduce that what if the person lived in 150 years ago before Mashiach came, or 50 years ago, as an example, for the coming Mashiach. It means he's a lost case until the time when Hashem says, I'm going to eradicate all the impurity of the world, therefore he's stuck with Shalosh Klipsat Meis, and this is the worst thing a person would want to be stuck with, something which is intrinsically evil, intrinsically impure. Alter Rebbe says, Alter Rebbe explains that it's shaykh, it's still possible for man, even before the ultimate fulfillment of Yisroel Ma'avim Min Haaretz, to alleviate himself from Shalosh Klipsat Meis. How? That he does, we'll learn again, he does a special tshuva. Not just a tshuva that he's going to grab the Gemara and say, I'm going to do good. It's a certain level of tshuva, it's not a regular tshuva. We'll again, Alter Rebbe uses very, very unique words. Alter Rebbe himself says it's not a regular tshuva, it's a very unique tshuva. That's the only way the person, even though he did engage in things which are essentially prohibited, that he can alleviate himself from these impure forces and energy, and not only alleviate himself from them, but in a way that he could even transform them. It's an enormous word of the Alter Rebbe, which says that he's able ultimately even to transform them. And again, it's a whole subject, which is again the Alter Rebbe's investment to the next part of the Peirik, which we look forward to learn this coming week. Have a great evening, everybody.